I'm going to go ahead and say welcome to everyone that's here. This is our third Q&A session by the European VC. The reason why we're doing it is mostly because we have this community of founders. It's a Slack community who are all looking to fundraise in the next 6 to 12 months. And we're all about trying to add value to help you guys get that ball rolling. And as you also know, we have the European VC podcast, which is what we're building to be the go-to place for insights into the VC industry as a whole, whether you're a founder, a VC, an LP, whatever you are. So it's really nice to have you all here, and I'm going to shoot it off to Andreas for a quick intro.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. We're talking to David Citron today. He's a partner at Global Founders Capital. And we are going to be talking about how David evaluates teams and why David believes the fit between the founder and the investor is incredibly important. I would maybe add that just for David's warning, because since we have the podcast, there's likely quite a few VCs and emerging managers popping in as well. So likely you'll get questions from your colleagues as well in the industry, and those might be a bit more complex and people trying to get you off your chair. So let's see.
Yeah. It's all going to be good fun. But before shooting it off to David, I need to pass the mic to G, and he's just going to run down through a couple of house rules. G.
Hello, guys. So this is first and foremost a Q&A session. So we encourage you all to ask as many questions as you wish. And we have two ways of you doing so. The first one is just to write your questions inside the chat box. You can just write it and we will ask David the question. Or if you'd like, you have the opportunity to ask him live, where you can turn on your camera and your mic and ask the question. How do you do that? You put a question on the chat box in between parentheses, and on caps lock, you write live. As you can see, I've written an example in the chat box, which says live between parentheses. How does David evaluate team strengths? And then when the time comes, we can pass it on to you to ask the question to David personally. Another is just two more rules. If you can, please keep your camera on. It makes the session much more dynamic for us. And please disable your microphones if you're not going to ask the question. Thanks.
G, thank you for that. David, after all those intros and house cleaning and whatever you want to call it, super cool to have you. Can you maybe just start by giving us a quick rundown? Who is David? What the hell do you do?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, happy to be here. Second of all, just quick disclaimer, everything I say here is my own personal opinion. It may be wrong, do what you will with it. VCs tend to, exude like intelligence, or at least they think they do, but we're not as smart as we think we are. So, it's just my opinion. It's how I try to do things. We're always trying to learn and get better over time. Yeah, that's just, my humble sort of perspective. So my background, I'm David Citron. 31 years old, based in Israel, been in venture for about 10 years now. Basically, my entire career has been as a VC. I just climbed the ranks from analyst to associate to principal, and now as partner at GFC. I don't know how much people know about GFC, but very quickly, GFC is an international VC, about 2.5 billion under management, global VC, pretty much team members are around the world and everywhere. Based, I guess, headquartered out of Germany. I'm the partner based in Israel, focused on Israeli deal flow. There are plenty of Israelis outside of Israel. So for me, it's just focused on Israelis in Israel and Israelis outside of Israel. I'm a lot more, I guess, B2B focused, enterprise focused than I get maybe most of my colleagues, who probably do a little bit more consumer than I do, primarily because Israel is pretty strong when it comes to enterprise tech. And historically, consumer has been, I would say, weak, but just a little bit less in abundance. It's changing over the past couple of years. We're seeing a lot more, which is great and exciting. Yeah, I mean that's just like the quick background. Investing for 10 years. Really enjoy the early stage game. Have been an early stage investor like my entire career. I don't like to do growth. It's not really interesting for me. It's kind of boring, or at least it was up until recently, where growth was actually numbers driven. Now, a B and a C round can still be with a company without revenue. So it's still early stage investing, just with a lot more money and no real traction to back it. And yeah, that's pretty much just, the quick sort of elevator pitch about myself, not very interesting, pretty vanilla. I'm not like a 3x, entrepreneur who's sold, companies for hundreds of millions of dollars. Not yet, at least. I'm the guy who just like lets the talented people do the job for him and just sits around and plays with money.
Not yet. We'll keep that in mind. This is a Q&A session. As G said, we'd love to have your questions. Please suggest questions. Please write in the chat. Request to talk. If you don't, Andreas and I will just keep on asking questions and and conversing with David. So don't hesitate. Andreas, do you want to start?
Yeah, David, I think
I'm getting an alert. I'm getting an alert that my internet connection is a bit unstable, so I might get off video to preserve bandwidth during the session. But so far, so good.
That's awesome. That's awesome. David, when we first started talking, you quickly zoned in on the teams part, and that's of course because you said, well, to you, it's everything is about teams. And then I challenged you a bit on that and said, but every VC says that. So maybe let's kick it off by saying, so why do you believe genuinely that it is all about teams? And what have been your experiences on that front that have led you to really have that strong conviction?
Right. So I guess like the background is when I started off as a young VC or in my early career days, I was always trying to just like get as methodical and as scientific as I could to try and figure out like how to do this. How does this game work? And I remember, doing the round, speaking to a lot of senior VCs and asking like, where's the science here in early stage investment? And they all looked at me like I was just an idiot. And like, there is no science here. It's all gut based. We make a decision and then we build a case around the decision, which is, I guess, one of the biggest fallacies in scientific experiments. So for me, that was like one of the most devastating sort of, I guess, revelations about the industry, because how do you, it's basically, institutionalized gambling with very big tickets and a lot of fun and a slow outcome process. So that didn't really make any sense to me. So the first thing I did was like, okay, let me go, do some research and read some research. And there was a lot of research on, the probabilities of success and, predictors of outcomes based on, certain like components in a company, in a startup. Right? And a lot of it focused on teams, which made a lot of sense because ultimately, when you're looking so early at an investment opportunity, there's pretty much nothing there, or at least nowadays it's even, exacerbated where there really is nothing. It's just a team. Sometimes it's not even a full team in place. So for me, one of the most interesting things, at least, to try and get a little bit clarity on was just like, what is a team? Like, how does it make sense to like just analyze a team? What are the characteristics? What are the components of a winning team versus a losing team? And how does it vary from opportunity to opportunity? And the further I went down the rabbit hole, the more I realized that this is just more of an academic exercise and has very, very little applicability to just the real world, which was kind of silly. And as somebody who got a degree in psychology, which was completely useless in university, one of the only course that I really appreciated and enjoyed was social psychology. Really understanding the social aspects of just internal and interpersonal dynamics, and it was super relevant, at least from my perspective, to what you do when you're investing. Because again, and that's like the sort of like the I guess the epilogue of the prologue of what I think is important to talk about, is that when you're investing so early, where there's really little traction or no traction at all, one of the most important components is the team. I think the way I like to invest, or the framework that I use, is based on Mark Suster's Upfront Ventures general partner framework, which is I think this is how he defined it. I could sort of freestyle it over the years, but it's like four components. It's the triple T plus M. So it's the team, the traction, the technology, and the market. And I think as the company becomes more mature over time, there's a different like weight that is like assigned to each one of those categories, right? So, as the company becomes more mature, you're probably going to attribute more to traction and the market, and maybe sometimes even the technology versus the team. But, when you're looking at the sort of the spectrum, the earlier it is on to the left, it's more of like, I guess, 80% is the team, or I just like, that's an arbitrary number. Like, the vast majority of the weight goes towards the team, because companies change over time, they adapt over time, they pivot, they'll pivot again and again and again, and they'll move from, one foot market to another, or one, product positioning, or one, go-to-market strategy. But something that doesn't ultimately change, or hopefully doesn't change, is the team. If the team is changing over time, that's an issue, and that's an issue that you don't typically expect to happen at a high occurrence rate. It'll usually happen in extreme situations where it's founder disagreements, and again, that also connects to just analyzing teams, is the ability to identify that, right? So, all in all, one of the most important components in analyzing an early stage deal is the team, because it's pretty much the only thing that has any viability or any relevance to the current status of the company at that given point in time. So that's why I think it's the most important component throughout the life cycle of the company, but on the early stage level, it's the most important. And I hope that answered the question. I didn't completely go off the rails with that.
Yeah, we might circle back there actually, because we do have here a request for a live question, and I like to give them priority. It's Jay. It's a live question. Jay, please turn on your mic if you can. Tell me if you struggle turning on your mic. And before asking a question, just tell us where you're from and what you do, and then go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, David. It's great to be here. I'm Jay. I'm currently based in London, studying at London Business School. Also interning at Plug and Play Ventures right now, and very similar position to David. Like, I don't see myself as a founder in the short term, at least, but I do want to be in VC, right? I'm building my investor framework. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about different technologies, like you said, David. But how do you get founders or VCs to value your opinion? Because I see a lot of VCs talk about, hey, we want X operators. A lot of founders are like, we don't want advice from someone who's just done banking or consulting, or not even been in our shoes. So once you've built that framework, what sort of differentiates a bad VC from a good VC without an operating experience?
Right. I mean, so as somebody who was never an operator and probably will never be, it's a good question. It's always difficult, and that really relates to just like interacting with teams, because you want to be helpful, you want to be there for them, but also you sometimes don't have much to contribute. So because the old adage of it's better to be thought as a fool than to open your mouth and prove it, right? So it's a fine line between wanting to be an activist and helping versus just being a bulldozer and overbearing and annoying and frustrating. So like the way I would do it is like, it's always listen, right? It's like sort of just like a relationship game, whether, whatever way you swing, listening is one of the most crucial components to a healthy relationship, and not just talking, and not just listening, but actually like internalizing what the other side needs. And based on that, it's always easy to provide value, right? So the best way for me, at least early on, was to show that, if somebody was worthwhile, taking seriously, is just, providing that kind of value, on the bi-weeklies, really just listening to see what's happening, always writing down. Always, the last question I always ask on a bi-weekly is like, what do you need from me? Like, what's missing? What can you not get to? And always just like creating like a conversation into something a lot more tactical, and creating just like objectives out of it, and then providing value. And as soon as you provide value, show the teams that you're listening and you're reactive and you're always trying to, take what they're saying and execute it, they'll view you as somebody who is helpful. And then when you try to like convey your opinion, even if they don't agree with it, they'll say like, this person is actually trying to help. So whatever he or she is saying is coming from a good place, because they know what the business is doing. You see many VCs that'll write a check in a company, will be completely offline, never talk to them, show up to a board meeting, say a bunch of stupid shit that is really generic and not helpful, and then just kind of like go back to tweeting. So that's like old school investors, or like really like just douchey investors, and I don't think founders really appreciate working with them. So that's what that would be like the blueprint that I would avoid. But it's also just trying to get your footing and figuring out like what you're good at, and how to leverage that as your entry point to build trust, and then eventually they'll listen to you. Or at least, I don't know if they'll internalize what you say, or they'll take it as face value, but they will listen to your voice when you speak versus just like tuning it out is what I think.
Perfect. That was very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jay.
David, before we take the next question that came in, I would like to frame this conversation around teams a bit based on the framework that I know you've also developed, saying, basically a matrix having team strengths being one, and then personality and team composition, and then experience and network and need for support. I'd love to hear you develop that framework a bit for us.
Oh man, I honestly could not really tell you how I did it. Most of it was based off of academic research, just trying to sort of break down these components that are super important. I think just as predictors. I'll give you one example. There was a lot of research that I read about the team composition, what's important in the team composition, and how that is relevant to the specific sector. So something that we've seen over that we've seen in research over the years is that if it's like a super technical, technologically oriented business, semiconductors, for example, or chips, for example, you typically want the founders to be very homogeneous. And all from the same background, all PhDs, all really technical, and then hopefully one of them has some sort of business acumen and is able to be the CEO. But it's really important for them all to understand technology on a very intimate level. And versus a general SaaS business, it's sort of like a good combination between a technologist and an operator. So it's also a spectrum. As it becomes less technological, the need so somewhere in the middle is a good split between heterogeneity, where it's one technical versus one non-technical. And then when you go to the spectrums, it could be two business guys that are just building a business and probably using some sort of off-the-shelf sort of tech platform, versus when it's super technical, you want to have really, really smart people. So that's one thing that was really interesting for me to kind of read in this academic research. Again, this is all academic research and it's all counterfactual, right? It's this is what happened in these specific cases, causation and correlation are fundamentally different, but it's a good way to sort of frame it in a way that makes sense. But again, for me, from my perspective, I think when you look at founders, you're always, I wouldn't really call it a SWOT, because SWOT is kind of dumb in my opinion. It's not really relevant. It's an old school exercise, but it's kind of understanding what they're good at, right? Their strengths, right? And the inverse of that is where they're not good at, what their weaknesses are. So again, it's always a spectrum from my experience. And then there's the experience and network, what they've done, who they know, which somewhat connects to the strengths. And all these variables connect to one another. They're super interactive with one another. They're not in silos. So you can view them all in silos, but then you have to understand how they each affect one, in different ways. And then the personality and team composition, which we just discussed. And then external support is, I guess, more of analyzing from your perspective, what would be the external support that is required here, and am I well equipped to provide that support? Because if the answer is no, then the relationship might not be as good as you think it is, because you won't provide the value, and there is that expectation of value. And B, you need to find supplemental support, whether it's from internal resources at your fund, or building your network, your own personal network over years to help. So that's sort of the high level sort of breakdown on my team analysis sort of framework. Again, it's more of a guideline versus a framework. I don't go with a checklist when I'm analyzing teams. Initially you're probably a little bit more rigid with the framework, so you can get your footing. But over the years, you figure out how to identify certain cues, and understand certain teams. So I would initially score it. Now it's not so much scoring, but rather just trying to identify certain things and elements that are either green flags or red flags, and then if you see more red flags and green flags, you have an issue. If it's somewhat balanced, might not be the best. If you're seeing more, it's overwhelmingly green, you're happy with it. It's again ultimately this is an art and not a science, and that's one of the things that I came to terms with over the years, is that there is no science. You can use science as a framework, but it is gut. It's a lot of gut, at least on the team side of things. Yeah, that's sort of just the impetus of this framework that I've used over the years. Happy to get into more granularity if it's interesting.
Guys, before you go there, just a second, we have had some people joining us. Welcome. This is a Q&A session, so feel free to write questions. If you want to ask them, write live between brackets and caps, and we'll pass you the mic. If you only want to write it, just write it. Andreas, back to you.
I just wanted to hear, David, because, you know, in this super competitive space we're in right now, you know, deals happen in sometimes hours almost. And I'm curious, when you are a team-oriented investor, how do you come to grasp with that? Because, you know, just a couple of years ago, you would have had typically 14 days at the very least, and oftentimes months to gauge a team and see how they develop and interact and also interact with you. But that's not really the case anymore. How do you navigate in this market?
Oh man, I mean, it's cruel. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Because like you said, deals are done in 24 hours. You know, I myself have experienced that. Like, you really want to build the relationship, but you also can't wait too long. So you gotta, you know, pack as much personal time and quality time with the founders as possible, and really get to know everybody as soon as possible. And it's not always, you know, something that's happening in person. You know, the Zoom sort of reality that has been controlling our lives for the past couple of years. You kind of learn how to build relationships with teams, and it's really difficult, right? Even just meeting people in person. I'll give you an example. I did a deal over Zoom, and then ultimately met the founders a couple months later. The CEO was huge. He's just like, you know, like a 2 meters 8. And then like you don't, and like there's certain, like, you know, physical attributes that you just don't see over Zoom, and it's like, oh wow, like your perception of an individual changes dramatically when you suddenly realize that he's a giant, right? You know, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. So, you know, you really need to, you know, get the feel of people really fast, which is very difficult. You know, each in its own flavor. Sometimes you'll have great founders, you just don't click with them, and you're just like, I don't want to work with this person, or I don't think I could even compete. Because if you don't have that immediate, like, personal connection, it's going to be hard to compete against Tiger or Andreessen, right? Because we're not Tiger, we're not Andreessen. There's only one Tiger, there's only one Andreessen. GFC is a fantastic fund, one of the better funds in Europe, in my opinion, or even around the world. But you know, you're competing against like these massive machines, and Tiger is just like a code name for like these massive funds that have like these armies and resources behind them. And if you don't get that immediate, like, spiritual / emotional connection going pretty fast, the likelihood of you winning a deal in a span of 24 hours just reduces quite dramatically. So I think it's really important to be personable, be non-bullshitty. Like my style is very like sarcastic / no BS sort of approach. I think, you know, that this is what works for me. Some people are a lot more serious. Some people are, you know, dazzle the founders with their understanding of the market or their analytical skills. It also depends on the founders. Some founders, you know, will click with my vibe, and others won't. Just as like I won't click with founders even if they're great. So I think, just to summarize, it really is a matter of just trying to condense as much, you know, quality time as possible with the founders, really getting to know them, trying to build a you know, that framework or like that foundation of relationship as soon as you can. If you could do it before the deal is live, better. Like, just, you know, build relationships with founders before they're even thinking about being founders. That's the best way of doing things. But if you don't have time, it's like speed dating, right? And ultimately it's a marriage, right? You're getting married with somebody you met 24 hours. And you know, I don't watch those trashy Netflix shows about people, like, you know, getting married after 24 hours or whatever it is. My wife does. And you know, from sneaking a peek every now and then, it's absurd, but that's pretty much what venture investing is at the early stage right now.
Venture at first sight. Yeah, nice.
Venture at first sight.
Exactly.
Mert, feel free to take the stage with your question.
I'm taking the copyright on that. I'm going to sell that show to Netflix, and I'm going to be able to retire. Okay.
As long as my name shows in the credits or whatever, I'm happy. Don't worry.
You'll get executive producer rights. You got it.
Ah, nice. This was worth it already.
You'll get the same kickback as the originators of the Marvel characters.
Yeah, exactly. Mert, you have your question. Feel free to turn on your mic. Tell us who you are before, and then go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, so I'm Mert, currently based in Amsterdam, but originally from Berlin, and working on a startup with a friend of mine that focuses on mental health. My question for you, David, was kind of answered already by you with within the last 5 minutes. It was more about what general components make a team be perceived as successful, but you've mentioned things like the network, personality. You said that things that the external support would want to see, and among some other things. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that question, but you answered quite a lot already. So
it varies like tremendously, right? But unfortunately, we live in a world where like you do initially judge books by their covers. So like certain backgrounds of like where they worked. Like so, if you're an ex-Googler, you're probably considered to be at a higher quality. But it depends. I'll give you an example. Europe, we see tons of founders coming from BCG, McKinsey. It shows like really good analytical skills, go-to-market skills, execution skills, and there's an overwhelming like proportion of founders and especially CEOs that come from that background. In Israel specifically, ex-consultants suck at execution. Like they're just not good, right? So there's like, again, that's a generalization. Obviously, there's some that are great, but I think if you look at just backgrounds in a very like just dry way of like where they worked, it's great. It's a good starting point. It's a good way to like kind of separate the chaff from the wheat. But you have to look beyond that. Sometimes there are really unconventional founders who maybe didn't even go to university and maybe didn't work for Google, but they're just amazing and they do a kick-ass job, right? There are plenty of examples of that over the year. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world don't have that conventional background, but are super smart. So I think it's just a matter of, from a venture investor perspective, it's easy to look at just your LinkedIn profile and see that you went to Stanford or you worked for Uber or Spotify to get at least a good like stepping stone of like whether this founder is interesting or not. But sometimes some people don't come from that background, but they augment it with other things. It's just a matter of presentation and just how you position yourself. So again, the answer is it depends, right?
That's a consultant-like response, right?
yeah. I can't commit to anything specific, but I think you got to kiss frogs. Some investors get it, and some investors don't. Just some founders get it, and some founders don't. That's the beauty here is, there are VCs that'll just follow that template, that cookie cutter template, and look at only ex-Googlers, which you think is dumb. And there are others who try to look a little beyond that. So it's more of, being personable, understanding where your strengths and weaknesses lie, and trying to, supplement those at the founding team level. So if you know that you're really good at like sales, but you suck at product, so bring a product person. If you know that you can do sales on product, just make sure that you have a really strong tech guy. There's a lot of boxes that you typically need to check and VCs look at when they're looking at a team on a very dry level. So just, try to optimize for that, at least to start. And if you could, drizzle a little bit of Uber and Spotify Stardust on top, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Maybe David, because not every, but many engagements between VCs and founders start at the pitch deck level, and they all have the team slide, and you need to do it. What would you say is the way to go if there's anything a team can do in that slide to make you want to take that meeting, and they can't just put ex-Googler because they haven't been there? What should they do? Is there any magic trick?
Again, I think like, VCs have the attention span of a goldfish. So, just try to peacock as much as you can, as soon as you can in the deck. If your strengths are the team, try to, just present that in the best way possible. And if it's not like ex-Googlers, but they have, some background, they bootstrap the business to $20 million in ARR, put that, in bold. So the VC will see that and be like, okay, this is interesting enough. If the strengths are coming from somewhere else.
And I think we're really the peacock it as soon as possible and as much as possible is really important to state there, because you have this typical structure of 12 slides and then you get the team at slide 8 or something like that. But if that's your strength, you need to somehow put it in almost the front page, because many VCs they've almost judged you at the front page, right? So
right, yeah. Common practice is to put the team slide sooner rather than later. If you put the team slide late, it begs a question. VCs are suspicious people. Is why was it so late? And also, like, by then I probably don't care. So that's why you should probably, even if the team isn't overly impressive, it's always good to know who, right? Because it's who, what, where, and how are sort of the questions that are, or like who, what, why, and how are the questions that are being asked. So who is always the first question. So I think, if even if you're not an ex-Googler, like find a good way to present the team in a way that is eye-catching. And if you're not MIT grad, if you're not an ex-Googler and you're pretty much just like a Joe Schmo, find another way to stand out just to get an attention. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of how like I view it. That's, you know, team slides is I think one of the most important slides in a deck.
I just want to make a comment before that, because David said something that I strongly agree with. It's connected to my background, but it depends a lot of the vertical, right? Because we're talking here about ex-Googlers, but if it's like a drug development startup, an ex-Moderna would be worth much more, right? So it's really about understanding the space you are in. So Mert, you're saying you guys are mental health. So, you know, if you're more digital health, if you're a medical device, you know, depending on what you are exactly, you know, that should inform you. And you should really just understand, right? Understand your vertical better than no one else. And you need to know what's needed. You don't need the VCs to tell you. And if you have what it's needed, the VCs will see it sooner or later, right?
Now, that was interesting what David said as well, is that the less tech you are, the more specialized you need people to be. So that was also what I thought, is because when you want to go mental health, you definitely need someone that knows about psychology, that knows about neurology and the biological aspect of it, maybe. So that's what I just wanted to
Right, but on the flip side, sometimes you see really, really smart entrepreneurs that come from really great backgrounds of saying like, this industry is really stupid and we're going to disrupt it, even though we know nothing about it. I think that's like one of the, like when the Lemonade guys out of Israel, that was their thought process. They're like, we know nothing about insurance, but insurance is a broken industry and we're going to fix it. So, you know, sometimes all it takes is a really, you know, smart team. And them specifically, they were serial entrepreneurs. So like, you know, wow, you know, it wasn't so hard for them to get the attention. But, you know, I think everything needs to be taken with a grain of salt. There are, you know, rules of thumb and there are conventions, but, you know, there are always outliers, and outliers are typically the ones that, you know, produce like outstanding returns.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then we have a question from Arnab. Arnab, turn on the mic, introduce yourself and go ahead.
Hi guys, hi everyone, thanks for having me. I'm Arnab, I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark, and I'm one of the founders of a service marketplace called Squire. So we focus more on the consumer side services, so household services like handyman, cleaning, and gardening, for example. My question, I might want to rephrase it a little bit. It's just about one of the things we see a lot when applying to the VCs is that they ask how many years of prior experience we have in the space. And our entire team, as it stands currently, we're all students or quite young in general. So how would you suggest we overcome this barrier by telling them that maybe we're, I don't know, is it our drive that's the attribute, the fact that we've known each other for about 15 years now and we work super well as a team? What is it we should focus on when we're talking?
If a VC is asking you how many years of experience you have, just write them off. Don't talk to them. Okay. It's like it's the wrong VC. Sometimes one of the biggest, like, you know, I guess challenges for a founder is to understand, like, is this the right VC for me? Which I think is great. I mean, the market is, when I started off as a young VC, like, it was, you know, power for the VCs. The entrepreneurs were at a real disadvantage and had to like grovel for cash. And the power dynamic has shifted dramatically in the favor of founders. And if you're receiving stupid questions like that, like how many years experience you have in the space, I mean, what I was a gardener when I was 15. Like, is that the answer that you need to? It doesn't make sense, like, because that's like probably the most unintelligent question that somebody can ask you. You know, there are plenty of great, you know, founders that are 17, 18 that are killing it, and you know, are CEOs of you know, unicorns and massive companies. So if somebody's going to write you off or going to challenge you on the fact that you're young and you're entrepreneurial, then find somebody else that can look past that. That's my 2 cents.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can you, David, it's a bit off topic, but I found it very interesting. Put some words onto, you know, founders diligencing VCs, you know, like understanding like which VCs should I go after? And let's go beyond like the basic shit, right? Vertical and stage, right? Could you expand a bit on your views on that?
Right. So again, it depends, right? So you can optimize for the blue chips, like the tier 1 VCs, which are great. The likelihood of you getting like the partner from the tier 1 VC that is going to be in the trenches with you, it's probably low because they're busy. They got, they're tweeting and they're writing Medium posts and they're wearing Patagonia vests and blah 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 blah. But I think that's the same way the VCs, or at least myself, look at like the personal relationship. You should really optimize for that personal connection when you're choosing a VC. That's when you're like already meeting with VCs beforehand. Trying to figure out who the VCs are. There are plenty of ways, right? You can speak to fellow founders, ask them like who they raised from, like if they recommend them or not. There are other ways of sort of reverse engineering, companies that you view as examples of adjacent business models that have disrupted similar industries that you're going after. So I don't know if you're a home nursing service. Look at a company that did a home plumbing service, like Arnab as an example. Try and look at VCs that understood that model. If it's a two-sided marketplace or if it's a SaaS-enabled marketplace, try and look at VCs that know that space, have done deals there before, that are not competitive and are not specifically in your space. Because one of the things that I, at least as a young VC, thought that made a lot of sense when I was talking about portfolio companies is like, yeah, if they invested in a company that is like pretty much a company that the same company as you, but one that failed, they'll for sure love you because you're doing it right this time. But the reality is that they're going to be super jaded and they're going to hate you even before you open your mouth. So it's also like a fine line between looking at VCs that will get you, but not VCs that are burned by you in the past. So again, there's so many different like variables you need to take in consideration. But at the end of the day, I think at least early on, optimize for personal relationships. Optimize for somebody that is going to be happy with the good news, but is not going to be an asshole with the bad news, and is going to be there for you when you need help. And is sometimes going to be able to say like, "Listen, dude, I don't know what to tell you." And somebody that you're going to be able to accept that answer from. It's it's just like it's picking another team member essentially. You won't pick somebody who's a Googler, that looks great on paper but sucks as an individual to bring him in a co-founder. And your first VC is your co-founder in a very like strong way.
We have here, I'm going to skip and then come back. We have a question, which is a written question. I'm going to kind of rephrase it. It's by Njabulu, and I'm sorry if I said that wrong. But it's not an easy question to answer, David. So I'm curious to see how you're going to go about it. But the question is basically, when you invest into a startup, what is the main use of funds you want to see entrepreneurs doing? So where do you want them to put the money at work?
Obviously t-shirts, just swag.
Merc.
Yeah, notebooks, fleeces, hats. I'm just kidding. Again, it depends. It depends on the company. It depends on the space. If it's a company that's more technological, then you're probably more on R&D. If there's like a lot of like heavy lifting on the R&D side, so more on engineering, more on software, that kind of stuff. If it's like more of a business play and it's a marketing play, then I would want to see some sort of chunk allocated to guerrilla marketing execution. Not Google ads. Don't like finance the evil corporations with ad spend, but rather intelligently think how you get from 0 to 0.5 from a user adoption perspective, because that's one of the things that we're always interested in. Like how do you go from no users to the first early adopter users that doesn't require you going to pay for them on Google and Facebook? That's not interesting. So it really depends. I think there's no like rule of thumb. Most companies you'd see a pretty modest marketing budget, if any. It would be more on engineering and product. Don't put anything in travel. Be super modest with travel. If I see a big travel expense, I get pissed at that because I think it's stupid. Yeah, I mean, it's
maybe David, could you comment on the specificity with which you want to see founders knowing what they want to do post deal? Because what you often see is founders saying, I'm looking for 500,000 euros, 200,000 is going to be product dev, 200,000 is going to be new hires, and then 100,000 for general admin. And that's not just enough. That's my view, at least, when I was reviewing deals.
Yeah, I mean, you can like give a high level sort of breakdown of what the use of funds are going to, build a P&L. I don't look at P&L so meticulously. I think, you know, especially on the revenue side of things, it's a bunch of bullshit. You know, your revenue projections are typically are typically absurd at best, and you know, just like delusional at worst. So I think from that perspective, it's just a matter of understanding what your needs are from a headcount perspective, how much it's going to cost you, and then add a 15-20% on top of that for like room for error on that side. Which again, most of your spend initially is on headcount. To be honest, like you want to build up the initial team, so that's the most important part. Whether it's headcount on the engineering side or headcount on the product or marketing or sales or whatever it is. I wouldn't expect to see us. The biggest red flags, and the one thing that pisses me off the most, is if I see that, you know, the immediate hires are CFOs. That aggravates me, because you don't need a CFO. You don't need a CFO until you're 100 employees. Not even then you can use an outsourced CFO. So like intelligently understand what you need, and it's very easy to like, you know, see like conventions that work, but it's not a one size fits all sort of situation. So my advice is like, don't over optimize there. Just like understand what you need, how much it's going to cost, add about 15-20% on top of it, and that's your budget.
What I often advise entrepreneurs I see is to focus more on the roadmap, have like a roadmap, know what you want to do in the next 12, 18 months, and then kind of just do your best to guesstimate those costs, right? Instead of just saying 50, 30, 20%, and then you're like, oh, what the fuck is that, right?
Yeah, and you can't even know, because like, look, I mean, Israel specifically, like the local currency, the shekel, has been stronger than ever, and it's like just decimating the dollar. So, you know, if you raised $6 million a year ago, that's worth I don't know, like 80% of what it was worth when you raised it. So, you know, shit happens. You need to like always have like room for error. But again, like don't do stupid things. Like don't have 30% of a marketing budget when you're a seed stage company. What are you marketing? You don't even have a product yet.
Exactly. We have actually two questions from Jay. Jay, I don't know if I'll have time for the two, so choose wisely the one you want to ask first.
No worries, thanks, David. He already answered my second question, so I'll just ask a question about sourcing. David, how do you balance inbound versus outbound? Do you actually try to balance that, and what's what work best for you? And also, have you seen other people sort of use automated sourcing and, you know, data-driven sourcing? Do you think that's something that could work down the line?
Yeah, so I mean, sourcing, you know, outbound is king. Inbound typically sucks, unless it comes from somebody that you really trust, and even then, it's most likely going to suck. You know, the good deals are the ones that you need to hunt for and find, unless you're Sequoia, right? And you've got that brand recognition that everyone knows and everyone wants to go to. So it is more of an outbound game, and I think 95% of the VCs will agree that it's an outbound game. From a sourcing perspective, I'm more of an introvert. I don't like going to conferences. I don't like talking to people if I don't have to. So it's more of like a data-driven approach. Before COVID, like that's where I shine, right? You know, scraping LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Facebook, Telegram, Reddit, WeChat, whatever, like, you know, wherever you find breadcrumbs for founders that typically like go to start their ideation process, that's where I would, you know, try and play like a detective game. I think COVID created a situation where most VCs had to adapt to that and find new ways to source deals. So, you know, it's always trying to find a new way to innovate the data-driven sourcing side of things. You have VCs that have turned it into into you know, perfect art, like Signal Fire, who does it in a really strong way. Having like internal proprietary systems that, you know, source their deals for them. Just as an example, but I think most VCs do outbound, and most of them use automated, like at least functions to at least source top of funnel.
It really depends on stage, right? It's at growth stage.
Yeah,
I'm talking
about early stage. Yeah, growth stage, it's pretty clear who the companies that are succeeding. It's pretty easy. You just go look at the headcount growth on LinkedIn. You're like, okay, this company is hiring, so they're probably doing well.
Andreas, do you want to ask a final question before we round this off?
Then it should be one, because I always think that it's curious how to every VC it's obvious that outsource or outbound is the way to go when you look for deals, whereas for founders it seems like it's the opposite. That's the perception. So founders think that, okay, I need to go out and send my pitch deck to every VC I can imagine. So I'm super curious to hear your reflections on this and why it's like that, and also what founders should do in the situation that they are basically in, because when you're at this stage where you need money and you haven't yet been able to create that VC hype around you, then what's the tactics you should employ?
Yeah, that's hard. I think like some VCs, myself included, are perfectly open to proactive outreach. I do, have deals fall between the cracks. People reach out on LinkedIn, and I don't follow up with everybody, but I'm perfectly open to it. Other VCs just like, they put like a email barrier on their LinkedIn, so you can't connect with them and all that, condescending bullshit. But I think, some VCs are perfectly open to outbound. They even put their email on their LinkedIn profile, as I do. So, that's one way of doing things. The best way to get in front of VCs is to network on the founder level. Always reach out to founders, ask them for advice on what you're doing. And most founders are friendly at the end of the day. They understand there's a high sense of camaraderie. And if they raise from VCs, they'll probably be happy to, share a deck, and see if there's like a double opt-in sort of situation there, and then make the connection. So I think if you're not super plugged into the VC sort of network, try to network with founders. It's a lot easier, and they're a lot friendlier and more like open to even just giving you feedback. And they'll be like the bridge between yourself and a VC. That's at least what I would do. And even, by the way, like when a VC is an investor at seed, it's always better for the founder to get an intro to the next stage investor from a fellow founder or from a portfolio company of that VC, versus like a VC going and saying like, hey, you should take a look at this company. Because the reality is that most VCs are going to say that all their portfolio companies are fantastic, even though most of them actually suck, because statistically most of them fail. So, you'd rather go through like a founder recommendation versus like a VC.
Yeah, I want to take this comment by David to do some self-promoting ourselves. Now, this is actually why we created our Slack community for founders, because it's a community now of 70 plus founders, and it's about helping you fundraise, helping you in that path. And the first and biggest asset is the community itself, right? So you have founders from all across Europe. Some of them have raised, some of them haven't, some of them are earlier stage, doesn't matter, but just networking through that community. It's a completely free program, open source. So if you're interested, just jump on the europeanvc.com, and we're happy to help you out. David, before we close this, any kind of final words, last things you'd like to share on this topic of team, or on the questions that we had today?
I mean, from a founder perspective, don't overthink it, right? Don't view this as like some sort of like framework that you need to like change yourself based on. Like, you are who you are. It's always good to improve and get better over time. But the best thing for you to do is kind of, at least on the founding team level, is to really have those internal discussions on like who's good at what, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, what the gaps are. Are they bridgeable gaps? Are they not bridgeable gaps? Is it like at a team member level? Is it at a higher level? And also come prepared to VCs with like a hiring list of who's missing. I think it really depends. If you don't really want help from the VC, don't bother with the personal relationship aspect. If you really want the help and you want somebody to be there, in the trenches with you, really optimize for a person that you feel like you can build a strong relationship over time. Because when you meet somebody and you're like, oh wow, I could totally be good, best friends with this person, and and ultimately you do become really good friends with that person because you have that click. That's the type of feeling you should probably be, looking to identify with the VC, and not like, wow, this guy's kind of an asshole, but it probably could be super helpful. Because if your initial reaction is this guy's kind of an asshole, he's probably at a certain point in time going to be an asshole, and you're not going to have that personal relationship to, sort of alleviate the assholeness and make it less of an aggravating situation. So I mean, that's my only word of advice is just don't overthink it.
And you're probably seeing him at his or her best behavior because it's the first impression, right?
Oh yeah, everyone's fake at a first impression. The best way I think the best way to like really get to know somebody is put them in a situation that is like high stress. So I don't know, push them in front of a moving car or something. I'm joking, but like try to get people out of their comfort zone. If you're a powerful founder and you've got like the luxury of taking your time, take them into invite them on like something that is unconventional and see how they respond, right? take them into the boxing ring, you know, go a couple of rounds with them, you know, that kind of shit.
That'd be fun.
That's yeah.
I like that one.
It might sound as David is kidding here, but I've definitely heard that from others as well. That, you know, from the VC side, that they deliberately, this is more late stage, but deliberately invite the founders to have the meetings in cafes and so on, to see how they engage with the waitresses and other people in the area. So just to make sure that these guys aren't dicks to their employees and stuff like that.
One of the things that pisses me off the most, and I meet a lot in founders in cafes, is when founders don't say thank you to the waiters, or they don't say please. That fucking aggravates me, because it's just a level of common courtesy. If you're looking to invest in a leader, you want the leader to treat the executives, but also like the janitors with the same level of respect. So, you know, there are a lot of like cues that you can probably identify and use that to your advantage. Same thing with the VCs, right? You know, VCs most of them are douchey, but some of them are really good people. They're all really good people, just some of them are very different. So just figure out what works for you. What would be like the most important components that you would like to see in a partner. Same as, you know, as you get a co-founder, and you know, apply that to some sort of real life experiment.
Cool. David, thank you for that. Andreas, can you share with us what's going to happen in 2 weeks?
Yes. In 2 weeks, we are going to be talking to Andres Dancausa from the Venture City. It's a VC fund which, in contrast to GFC, has their own accelerator and invests to a very large extent in startups coming out of that accelerator. So that's going to be super interesting. And there we are going to be talking about founder-friendly terms and fostering a good relationship, collaborating relationships with your investor. And I think that's one of the topics that we could have talked about today as well. How David, you know, reacts to the market that we have today, also in creating deals. So yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, cool, guys. David, thank you very much. It was great having you. Hopefully we'll welcome you again in some other type of content or form that we think of. But thank you for being here. I appreciated it. And thank you everyone else.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. And anybody, feel free to reach out if there's anything I can do to help. All the best, guys.
See ya. Bye-bye.